Wife always waved at the bikers every morning, but one day her husband followed her and froze in shock. She was there again, standing at the corner of Maple and Fifth with her coffee cup raised like a salute, her smile bright as the morning sun. Daniel watched from his car 3 blocks back as the pack of Harleys thundered past his wife, and every single rider, 10, maybe 12 of them, raised a hand in return. Some nodded, some saluted. One old-timer with a gray beard even slowed down to wave with both hands. And Sarah just stood there, beaming, like she'd known these men her entire life. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his chest hollow with a fear he couldn't name. Who the hell were these men? And why did his wife of 12 years meet them here every single morning like it was some kind of ritual he'd never been invited to understand? Wait before the next ride begins. If this story already hits you right in the chest, tell us where you're watching from. To ride with the Brotherhood through the next promise, loss, or redemption, subscribe and join the club. Engines up, back to the road. It had started 3 weeks ago. The morning Daniel had woken up early with a splitting headache and found Sarah's side of the bed already cold. The sheets were pulled back neatly, her pillow still bearing the indent of her head, but she was gone. He'd stumbled downstairs at 6:47 a.m., squinting against the morning light streaming through the kitchen windows to find the coffee pot full and still warm, the scent of dark roast filling the air. But Sarah was nowhere in sight. Her car sat in the driveway. He could see it through the kitchen window, morning dew glistening on the windshield. Her purse was on the kitchen counter where she always left it, keys in the little ceramic bowl they'd bought on their honeymoon in Mexico. Her phone was charging by the sink, the screen dark and silent. Everything that would indicate she'd left the house was still here, except Sarah herself. Daniel's first thought had been the bathroom, but it was empty. Then the basement. Maybe she was doing laundry. But the machines were silent and still. He'd checked the backyard next, thinking maybe she'd gone out to tend to her garden, to check on the tomato plants she'd been nursing through a particularly hot summer. Nothing. The garden was undisturbed, the morning glories just beginning to open their faces to the sun. He'd grabbed his jacket and headed out the front door, calling her name softly at first, then louder. "Sarah! Sarah!" His voice echoed down the empty street, and a neighbor walking her golden retriever had looked over with concern. "You okay, Daniel?" "Have you seen Sarah?" he'd asked, and heard the edge of panic in his own voice. "Not this morning, no. Everything all right?" Yeah, fine. Just looking for her." He'd walked the block in his pajama pants and slippers, feeling foolish, feeling worried, his mind conjuring increasingly dire scenarios. Had she gone for a walk and gotten lost? Had she fallen somewhere, hurt herself? Was she lying in a ditch even now, calling for help that wasn't coming? And then, 23 minutes after he'd first realized she was gone, Sarah had come walking up the sidewalk from the opposite direction. Her cheeks were flushed pink, her hair slightly mussed. Her travel mug, the one with the sunflowers on it that her students had given her last year. She'd looked surprised to see him standing in the driveway. "Daniel, what are you doing up so early?" "I could ask you the same thing," he'd said, relief and confusion warring in his chest. "Where were you?" "Morning walk," she'd said, smiling that easy smile that had first made him fall in love with her 15 years ago. "Couldn't sleep, needed to clear my head." She'd kissed his cheek, her lips warm, and headed inside. And Daniel had stood there for a moment longer, breathing in the cool morning air, telling himself it was nothing. People went for walks. People needed to clear their heads. There was nothing strange about it. Except Sarah didn't walk. Not really. She had bad knees, the legacy of a skiing accident during her junior year of college when she'd blown out her ACL trying to impress some boy whose name she couldn't even remember anymore. The surgery had fixed most of the damage, but she still complained when they had to park far from the grocery store entrance, still winced when climbing stairs, still chose the elevator over the steps whenever possible. The idea of her suddenly taking up a daily walking habit made about as much sense as her joining a boxing gym or deciding to run a marathon. But Daniel had pushed the thought aside. 12 years of marriage had taught him that people could surprise you. Maybe Sarah's knees were feeling better. Maybe she'd decided to push through the discomfort. Maybe this was her version of a midlife awakening, a way to reclaim some part of herself that had gotten lost in the years of teaching and grading papers and attending parent-teacher conferences. Then it happened again the next morning. Daniel woke at 7 o'clock to find Sarah's side of the bed cold and empty. Downstairs, the coffee was made, but Sarah was gone. 28 minutes later, she returned, flushed and smiling, with that same explanation. Morning walk, clearing my head. And the day after that, and the day after that. Every weekday morning at 6:45 a.m., Sarah would disappear for exactly 30 minutes, returning with flushed cheeks and bright eyes and that same simple explanation that was starting to feel less like truth and more like a script she'd memorized. Daniel wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her. But little details started piling up, small inconsistencies that his mind couldn't quite reconcile. Like the fact that Sarah never changed into workout clothes for these walks. She just went in whatever she'd slept in, usually his old college t-shirts and pajama pants. Or the fact that she never came back sweaty or winded, never complained about her knees hurting afterward, never mentioned where she'd walked or what she'd seen. And then there was the smell. 3 days ago, on Thursday morning, Daniel had hugged Sarah when she returned and had caught it, faint but unmistakable, the scent of exhaust clinging to her clothes. Not car exhaust, something heavier, richer, with that particular bite that came from high-displacement engines, motorcycle exhaust. Daniel knew the smell well. His father had ridden bikes when Daniel was a kid, had taken him to rallies and shown him how to change oil and tighten chains. That particular combination of gasoline and hot metal and burning oil was impossible to mistake. But Sarah didn't ride motorcycles, didn't know anyone who did. They lived in a quiet, suburban neighborhood where people drove minivans and sedans and the occasional Tesla. So where the hell was she getting motorcycle exhaust on her clothes at 7 in the morning? That's when the real worry had started. That's when Daniel's mind began spinning scenarios he didn't want to entertain. Was Sarah having an affair? Was there some biker she'd met, some rough-around-the-edges guy who represented everything their comfortable suburban life wasn't? Was she sneaking out every morning to see him, to feel alive in a way Daniel couldn't provide? The thought made him physically ill, but he couldn't shake it, couldn't stop imagining Sarah in the arms of another man, couldn't stop seeing her flushed cheeks and bright eyes and wondering if they had nothing to do with exercise and everything to do with secrets. He'd tried to bring it up casually. So where do you walk? Maybe I could join you sometime. Oh, just around the neighborhood, nothing special. And I kind of like having the time to myself, to think. What do you think about? She'd laughed. School stuff, mostly. Lesson plans, kids I'm worried about. Normal teacher things. Normal. Everything was normal. Except nothing felt normal anymore. So this morning, this Monday morning, with clouds threatening rain and a chill in the air, Daniel had made his decision. He would follow her. He would see where these morning walks actually went. And maybe, just maybe, he'd find an innocent explanation. Maybe she really was just walking. Maybe the motorcycle smell came from passing bikes on the street. Maybe his mind was conjuring infidelity, where there was only a wife trying to carve out 30 minutes of solitude before her day began. Or maybe he'd find the truth, whatever that turned out to be. This morning, he'd set his alarm for 6:15, 15 minutes before Sarah usually stirred. When it went off, he'd silenced it quickly and lay still, his heart already racing, listening to Sarah's breathing beside him. At 6:30, right on schedule, she'd shifted, the mattress dipping as she sat up. Daniel had kept his eyes closed, his breathing slow and steady, while she slipped out of bed with practiced quietness. He'd listened to her move through the house, the soft pad of her feet on the carpet, the creak of the third stair from the top that she knew to avoid but sometimes forgot, the whisper of the front door opening and closing, the deadbolt turning with a soft snick. He'd given her a 5-minute head start, watching the clock on his nightstand with mounting anxiety. 6:35, 6:36, 6:37, each minute feeling like an hour. At 6:40, Daniel had thrown off the covers and moved fast. Jeans, a hoodie, running shoes. He'd grabbed his phone and keys, splashed water on his face, and headed downstairs. Through the kitchen window, he could see Sarah's figure already 2 blocks away, moving with purpose down Maple Street. Daniel had climbed into his car, the sensible Honda Accord they'd bought 3 years ago because it was reliable and fuel-efficient, and pulled out of the driveway with his headlights off. The streets were mostly empty at this hour, just a few other early risers heading to work or the gym, and Daniel was able to stay well back, keeping 2 or 3 cars between him and Sarah's walking figure whenever possible. She'd walked 4 blocks east on Maple, past the Rodriguez house with its elaborate Halloween decorations already up even though it was only early September, past the park where neighborhood kids played soccer on weekends, past the elementary school where she'd taught for 15 years. Then she'd turned south on 5th Street, and Daniel had felt his chest tighten. This wasn't the neighborhood. This was heading toward the old industrial district, toward warehouses and auto body shops and parts of town that Sarah had no reason to visit. But she'd kept walking, her pace steady, her travel mug in one hand, until she'd reached the corner of Maple and 5th. And there she stopped, checked her watch, looked toward the west, toward the rising sun, and waited. Daniel had pulled over 3 blocks back, partially hidden behind a delivery truck, and watched. His hands were sweating on the steering wheel. His mouth was dry. Every muscle in his body felt coiled tight with tension. 6:44 a.m. Sarah was just standing there, sipping her coffee, her face tilted toward the sun. 6:45 a.m. And then Daniel heard it. The sound started as a low rumble, so deep he felt it in his chest before his ears registered it. It grew louder, building, becoming thunder, and then they appeared at the western end of Maple Street. Motorcycles, a pack of them, riding in formation, chrome catching the morning light. Leather-clad riders astride machines that looked like they'd been built for power and nothing else. Harleys mostly, big touring bikes with saddlebags and fairings. A few choppers with extended forks and custom paint jobs. One massive trike that looked like it could haul a small family. 10 bikes, 12, moving together like a school of fish, synchronized and purposeful. And Sarah, his wife, his Sarah, stepped to the curb and raised her coffee cup like a salute, her face breaking into a smile so bright it made Daniel's heart hurt. And every single rider waved back. Some just raised a hand, a casual acknowledgement. Others nodded, their faces visible now as they passed. Older men mostly, with beards and weathered skin and eyes that crinkled with warmth. One rider, an old-timer with a gray beard that hung to the middle of his chest, actually slowed down and waved with both hands, his face splitting in a grin. The pack thundered past, engines roaring, and Sarah just stood there, beaming, her hands still raised until the last bike disappeared around the corner and the sound faded to a distant rumble. Then she lowered her arm, took another sip of coffee, and started walking back home, her expression content, like she'd just witnessed something holy. Daniel sat in his car, his mind blank with shock. What the hell had he just seen? Who were these men? How did Sarah know them? And why had she been meeting them here every morning, waving at them like they were old friends, and keeping the whole thing secret from him? The rational part of his mind tried to supply explanations. Maybe they were teachers from another school. Maybe they were parents of former students. Maybe this was some kind of community outreach thing that Sarah had forgotten to mention. But none of that made sense. Teachers didn't ride in motorcycle packs at 6:45 in the morning. Parents didn't synchronize their rides past a random street corner just to wave at someone. And Sarah didn't keep secrets. She was the most transparent person he knew, someone who told him about every student struggle and every staff meeting drama and every decision about what color to paint the bathroom. So who were these men, and what did they mean to his wife? Daniel's hands were shaking now, a fine tremor that made it hard to grip the steering wheel. He could drive home right now, could beat Sarah there, pretend he'd never followed her, make breakfast and kiss her goodbye, and spend the rest of his life wondering. Or he could confront her here in the street, demand answers, force the truth into the open, even if it destroyed them. He did neither. Instead, as Sarah's figure disappeared around the corner toward home, Daniel started his car and drove west, following the direction the motorcycles had gone, following the sound that was already fading into the distance, following his fear toward whatever truth waited at the end of this road. The pack led him out of town, onto Highway 49, which cut north through farmland and forest toward the mountains. Daniel kept his distance, letting 2 or 3 cars stay between him and the last bike in the formation. The riders moved with military precision, staggered formation, maintaining consistent speed, signaling lane changes in perfect unison. They rode like a unit, like brothers, like men who'd been riding together so long they could communicate without words. Daniel had never ridden a motorcycle. His father had, back in the day, a Harley Sportster he'd loved more than he loved most people, including Daniel's mother. But after the divorce, after his father had ridden off into the sunset with a woman 20 years younger and never looked back, Daniel had decided that motorcycles represented everything he didn't want to be: reckless, selfish, unreliable. Now, watching these riders move together with such coordination and purpose, he wondered if he'd been wrong. There was something almost beautiful about it. The way they leaned into curves as one, the way they looked out for each other, the way the lead rider would point out road hazards and the others would echo the gesture back through the formation. After 23 minutes of highway driving, the pack took an exit onto a smaller 2-lane road that wound through pine forest and abandoned farmland. Daniel followed, his anxiety ratcheting up with every mile. The houses grew farther apart out here, the land wilder, less manicured. They passed an old barn with its roof caved in, a rusted tractor sitting in an overgrown field, a hand-painted sign advertising fresh eggs that looked like it hadn't been updated in a decade. The road climbed into the foothills, the trees pressing closer on either side. Ponderosa pines and Douglas firs that blocked out the sun and filled the air with the sharp, clean scent of resin. The temperature dropped a few degrees, and Daniel rolled up his window, suddenly aware of how far from civilization they'd traveled. Then the road curved around a blind turn, the trees opened up, and Daniel found himself staring at a clearing. A large clearing, with a gravel parking lot that held at least 30 motorcycles. And at the center of it all, a low-slung building that looked like it had been there forever. Cinder block walls painted flat black, small windows with bars over them, a reinforced steel door, and a sign hanging above the entrance that made Daniel's blood run cold. Hell's Angels MC, Riverbend Chapter. Below the words, painted in red and white, was the Death Head, the winged skull that was instantly recognizable around the world. Daniel had seen it on TV, in movies, in documentaries about outlaw motorcycle clubs and organized crime and violence that happened in the shadows where decent people didn't look. And his wife, his sweet, kind, third-grade teacher wife, who baked cookies for the PTA and cried during Hallmark commercials, had been waving at these men every morning. Daniel's hands were numb on the steering wheel. His vision tunneled, and for a moment he thought he might pass out. Hell's Angels, the most notorious motorcycle club in the world. Men who, according to everything he'd ever heard, trafficked in drugs and violence and intimidation. Men who lived by their own code, outside the law, answerable to no one but themselves. What the hell was Sarah doing with these people? The pack pulled into the lot, engines rumbling like caged thunder. Then, one by one, fell silent. The riders dismounted with practiced efficiency, pulling off helmets, hanging them on handlebars, stretching out muscles stiff from the ride. They moved with the easy camaraderie of men who'd known each other for decades, clapping each other on the shoulders, sharing jokes Daniel couldn't hear, their leather cuts creaking as they moved. Daniel parked on the far side of the road, partially hidden behind a stand of pines, and watched. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, trying to reconcile the Sarah he knew with this secret connection to a motorcycle club. An older man, maybe 65, with a gray beard and long hair pulled back in a ponytail, seemed to be in charge. He said something Daniel couldn't hear, and several of the other riders laughed. Then he gestured toward the clubhouse, and the group started moving that direction, their boots crunching on the gravel. Daniel sat there for 10 minutes, then 20. His phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "Where are you? Made breakfast." He stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard, then turned off the phone without responding. He should leave, should drive home and demand Sarah explain this, should trust that there was some reasonable explanation that would make everything okay. But he couldn't move. Some deep, primal need to understand kept him rooted to the spot, watching that black building with its ominous sign, trying to imagine what happened inside those walls. Finally, at 8:17 a.m., Daniel made his decision. He got out of the car, locked it, and crossed the road. The gravel crunched loud under his shoes. Dress shoes, he realized suddenly, completely inappropriate for this environment. He was wearing khakis and a button-down under his hoodie, looking like exactly what he was, a suburban accountant who'd wandered into the wrong neighborhood. The motorcycles gleamed in the morning sun, chrome and paint maintained with obvious care. As Daniel passed them, he noted details: custom seats, aftermarket exhausts, saddlebags etched with names and insignias he didn't recognize. These weren't just bikes. They were extensions of identity, works of art and engineering that spoke to something deeper than mere transportation. Daniel reached the door, heavy steel painted black, no windows, no way to see inside. For a moment, he just stood there, his hand raised to knock, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. Then, before he could second-guess himself, he knocked. 3 sharp raps that echoed in the stillness. The silence that followed felt absolute, oppressive. Daniel counted seconds, 5, 10, 15, and with each passing moment, his certainty that this was a terrible idea grew stronger. Then he heard footsteps, heavy boots on concrete growing louder, the sound of a deadbolt being thrown, and the door swung open. "Help you?" the man said, his voice like gravel in a blender. Daniel's mouth was dry. I'm looking for someone. I think my wife knows you guys." The big man's eyes narrowed. "Your wife?" "Sarah," Daniel said, the name coming out strangled. "Sarah Mitchell. She waves at you guys every morning, at Maple and Fifth." The big man's expression changed. The hardness melted, replaced by something Daniel couldn't quite read, surprise, maybe, or recognition. He turned his head and called back into the clubhouse. "Bishop, you need to hear this." Footsteps again, and then another man appeared, the older one with the gray beard Daniel had seen earlier. He looked at Daniel with sharp, assessing eyes. "You said Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes," Daniel said, "my wife. She's been waving at you guys every morning for weeks, and I don't understand why, and she won't tell me, and I need to know." His voice broke. "I need to know what's going on." Bishop studied him for a long moment. Then he stepped back and gestured Daniel inside. "Come on in, we need to talk." The clubhouse was dark and smelled like motor oil and old leather. Photos covered the walls, group shots, bikes, men with their arms around each other, a few faded images that looked decades old. There was a bar along one wall, pool tables in the back, and in the center, a long table surrounded by chairs where several of the riders now sat, watching Daniel with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. Bishop pointed to an empty chair. "Sit." Daniel sat. His legs felt weak. Bishop pulled out a chair across from him and sat down too, his movements slow and deliberate. "Your wife," he said, "Sarah Mitchell. She's a teacher, right? Jefferson Elementary?" "Yes," Daniel said. "How do you know that?" "Because," Bishop said, "she taught my grandson." Daniel blinked. "What?" "5 years ago," Bishop continued, his voice low and rough, "my daughter, she was going through a rough divorce, real ugly. Her husband was a piece of shit, abusive, mean drunk. She got out, got custody of my grandson, but the kid, he was struggling. Nightmares, couldn't focus in school, acting out. He was in 2nd grade, and the school was ready to hold him back, maybe even send him to alternative school." Bishop paused, his jaw working. "Then he got Mrs. Mitchell, your wife." And she saw him, really saw him. Not just some problem kid, but a boy who was hurting. She stayed after school with him 3 days a week, no extra pay, just because she cared. She worked with my daughter, got Lucas into counseling, made sure he knew he was safe and loved and that what happened to his mama wasn't his fault. Daniel's throat tightened. Sarah had never mentioned this, never said a word. By the end of that year, Bishop said, Lucas was reading at grade level, smiling again, making friends. Your wife saved that boy. She saved my daughter too, if I'm being honest. Gave her hope when she didn't have any left. The big man who'd answered the door, Diesel, Daniel heard someone call him, spoke up from the end of the table. She taught my niece too. Little girl named Emma, came to this country from Guatemala when she was 6, didn't speak a word of English. School wanted to put her in ESL classes, separate her from the other kids. Your wife fought for her, tutored her during lunch, used her own money to buy Spanish-English books, made sure Emma felt like she belonged. By 4th grade, Emma was top of her class. Another man, this one younger, with a bandana tied around his head, leaned forward. She taught my nephew after his parents died in a car crash. Kid went to live with his grandma, my mom, and he was so angry, so lost. Your wife showed up at my mom's house on her own time, brought homework and art supplies, and just listened to him. Let him talk about his parents, cry, be angry. She didn't try to fix him, just made sure he knew someone gave a damn. Daniel felt tears burning in his eyes. I don't understand. Why didn't she tell me about any of this? Because that's who your wife is, Bishop said simply. She doesn't do it for recognition. She does it because it's right. But the waving, Daniel said, every morning. Why? Bishop's expression softened. About a month ago, Lucas, he's 13 now, he told me his favorite teacher was retiring, Mrs. Mitchell. She'd been at Jefferson for 15 years and was moving on to something else. I mentioned it at church and word spread. Turned out half the brothers in this club either have kids or nieces or nephews or grandkids who your wife taught. Kids she helped when nobody else would. He gestured around the room. We got together and decided we wanted to do something for her, something to show our appreciation. So we looked up where she lived and figured out her morning routine. And every day, on our way to our morning ride, we go past Maple and 5th at 6:45, and we wave. It's our way of saying thank you, of showing respect to a woman who gave our families more than we could ever repay." Daniel couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The room swam in front of him, and he realized he was crying, really crying, for the first time in years. "Your wife," Bishop said quietly, "is one of the best people I've ever known, and she's never asked for anything in return. Not money, not thanks, not even acknowledgement. She just keeps showing up, keeps caring, keeps making a difference." He paused. "So, yeah, we wave. Every morning, and we'll keep waving until the day she tells us to stop." Daniel drove home in a daze, his mind spinning with everything he'd heard. The morning sun was fully up now, bright and warm, flooding through his windshield and making him squint. The streets of Riverbend were coming alive with the usual Monday routines. People in business clothes hurrying to their cars with travel mugs and briefcases. School buses rumbling past. Crossing guards taking their positions. Dogs being walked by owners still in their pajamas. Everything looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago. The same houses, the same trees, the same cracks in the sidewalk he'd driven past 1,000 times. But Daniel felt fundamentally changed, like he'd been taken apart and reassembled with pieces in a different order, and nothing would ever look quite the same again. He thought about what Bishop had said, about Lucas, the traumatized little boy who Sarah had helped heal, about Emma, the immigrant girl who Sarah had fought for, about Tommy, the grieving child who Sarah had sat with while he cried for parents who would never come home. Story after story, each one a life changed, a future altered. A child who might have been lost but was saved because one teacher decided they mattered. And Sarah had never said a word about any of it, never come home and bragged about her impact, never asked for recognition or praise or even acknowledgement. She'd just done the work, day after day, year after year, and let her legacy speak in the lives of children who went on to thrive. How had he missed this? How had he lived with this woman for 12 years, shared her bed and her life and her dreams, and never really seen the depth of what she was doing? The answer, Daniel realized with a sick twist of shame, was simple. He hadn't been paying attention. He'd been focused on his own career, his own concerns, his own comfortable routine. He'd seen Sarah as his wife, his partner, someone who made good lasagna and remembered to water the plants and kept their life organized. But he'd never really looked at her work, never asked the deep questions about what she did all day, never understood that teaching wasn't just a job for her. It was a calling, a mission, a way of changing the world one child at a time. When he pulled into the driveway, Sarah's car was there, and through the kitchen window he could see her moving around, probably cooking breakfast, to replace the one that had gone cold when he'd disappeared. For a moment he just sat there, engine off, hands still on the steering wheel, looking at the house he'd shared with her for 12 years. It was a good house, nothing fancy, a 3-bedroom ranch they'd bought when they first got married, planning to fill it with kids someday. That hadn't happened. Sarah had miscarried twice, and after the second time, they'd decided to stop trying, to accept that maybe children weren't in their future. It had hurt, that acceptance, but they'd built a good life anyway. Daniel had his accounting firm, Sarah had her teaching, and they had each other. But now Daniel wondered how much pain Sarah had been carrying that he'd never seen. All those kids she poured herself into, were they filling a void left by the children she couldn't have? Was her fierce dedication to Lucas and Emma and Tommy and all the others a way of being the mother she'd never gotten to be? And if so, why had he never realized it? Why had he never asked? Daniel got out of the car, his legs unsteady, and walked to the front door. His hands shook as he turned the knob. Inside, he could hear Sarah humming, something soft and off-key, the way she always did when she was cooking. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, warm and domestic and utterly normal. He found her at the stove, scrambling eggs in the cast-iron skillet they'd gotten as a wedding gift. She was still in her pajamas, his old University of Washington t-shirt and flannel pants, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked up when he entered, and her smile was bright but tinged with confusion. "Hey," she said, "I thought you were sleeping in. I texted you, but you didn't respond. Want some breakfast? I made extra bacon." Daniel crossed the kitchen without a word. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close, his face buried in her hair. She smelled like coffee and vanilla shampoo and something uniquely Sarah, something he'd know blind in a room full of strangers. She stiffened in surprise. They weren't usually this demonstrative, especially not in the morning before coffee had fully kicked in. But then she relaxed, her body softening against his. She set down the spatula, turned off the burner, and let herself be held. "Daniel? What's wrong?" "Nothing," he said, his voice muffled against her neck. "Nothing's wrong. I love you. I love you so much." She turned in his arms, her brow furrowed with concern, her hands coming up to cup his face. "I love you too, but you're scaring me. What happened? Where were you?" He pulled back just enough to look at her face. This woman he'd married 15 years ago on a rainy October day. This woman he'd promised to cherish and honor. This woman he was realizing he'd never truly known at all. Her eyes were brown with flecks of gold that caught the light, framed by laugh lines that had deepened over the years. There was gray starting in her hair now, at the temples, and she'd put on a few pounds since they'd gotten married, settling into a comfort with her body that he found beautiful, even if she sometimes complained about it. She was 42 years old. She was a third-grade teacher. She was his wife. And she was a hero to dozens of families who would never forget what she'd done for their children. "I followed you this morning," he said, the words coming out in a rush. Her eyes widened. "What?" "I followed you to Maple and Fifth. I've been worried for weeks, watching you disappear every morning. And I thought," his voice broke, "I thought you were having an affair. I thought you were meeting someone, and I was terrified that I was losing you." Sarah's face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, hurt, understanding, and finally something that looked like guilt. "Oh, Daniel. Oh, honey. I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I should have explained." "And then, I followed the bikers," Daniel continued, talking over her. "I followed them to their clubhouse, and I went inside, and Bishop told me about Lucas, and Diesel told me about Emma. And everyone told me story after story about kids you've helped, lives you've changed, families you've saved." Tears were streaming down his face now, hot and unchecked. "And Sarah, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me you were doing something so incredible?" She looked down, her cheeks flushing, her hands dropping from his face. "Because," she said softly, "it's just what I do. It's not special. It's just being a teacher." "It is special," Daniel said fiercely, his hands gripping her shoulders perhaps too tightly, but unable to let go. "It's incredible. Those men, they're Hell's Angels, Sarah. Actual Hell's Angels. And they talk about you like you're a saint. They organize their entire morning ride around waving at you because they respect you so much. Because you gave their families something priceless." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want you to worry," she whispered. "I didn't want you thinking I was mixed up with some dangerous motorcycle club. I know how it looks, a suburban teacher being friendly with bikers. But they're not dangerous, Daniel. Not to me, not to anyone who matters to them. They're fathers and grandfathers and uncles who love their families and take care of their community." "I know," Daniel said. "I saw that. I saw how they talked about their kids, about you, about the difference you made. And I'm not worried about them. He struggled to find the words. "I'm in awe of you. I'm ashamed that I didn't see this before. That I've been so wrapped up in my own life that I never really understood what you do all day, what it costs you, what it means." "It doesn't cost me anything," Sarah said, but her voice wavered. "Yes, it does," Daniel said gently. It costs you time and energy and money and pieces of your heart. You give so much, Sarah. You've been giving for 15 years. And his voice cracked again. I never told you how amazing that is. How proud I am of you. How lucky I am to be married to someone who makes the world better just by showing up. Sarah broke then. Really broke, her face crumpling as she started to cry. Daniel pulled her close, and they stood there in the kitchen holding each other, while the eggs grew cold on the stove and the morning light painted patterns on the floor. I wanted to tell you, Sarah said against his chest, her voice hitching, about the kids, about the extra work, but it always seemed self-serving, like I was bragging, and you were always so busy with the firm, and I didn't want to burden you with school drama or sad stories about kids with hard lives. I want to know, Daniel said. I want to hear about all of it, the sad stories, the victories, the kids who break your heart, and the ones who make you proud. I want to be part of your work, even if it's just listening. I want to understand what makes you wake up every day excited to go to school. She pulled back, wiping at her eyes, giving him a watery smile. You really want to hear about 8-year-olds struggling with multiplication? I really do, he said, and meant it completely. They made fresh eggs. The first batch was unsalvageable, and sat at the kitchen table while Sarah told him stories about Marcus, who could barely read at the start of the year, but finished with a love of Harry Potter books, about Lily, whose parents were going through a messy divorce and who needed extra support to get through each day, about Ahmed, a refugee from Syria who was brilliant at math but terrified to speak English in front of his classmates. Daniel listened to all of it, really listened for perhaps the first time in years, and saw his wife in a completely new light. She wasn't just going through the motions of teaching. She was fighting for these kids, advocating for them, believing in them when nobody else would. Can I ask you something? Daniel said when she paused to drink her coffee. Anything. Why are you retiring? You're only 42. You could teach for another 20 years. Sarah's expression shifted, became thoughtful and a little sad. Because I want to do more, she said slowly. I've been thinking about this for a while. What I do at Jefferson is good, but it's limited. I have 23 kids in my class right now, and I can't give them all the support they need. There are kids slipping through the cracks, kids with learning disabilities that aren't being diagnosed, kids dealing with trauma at home, kids who just need someone to believe in them, but there aren't enough hours in the day. She set down her coffee cup, her eyes bright with the passion Daniel remembered from when they'd first met. I want to start a tutoring center, a place where kids who are struggling can come after school, get help with homework, have a safe space to just exist without pressure. I want to offer art programs, music lessons, maybe even counseling services. A place that's free or low cost, so money isn't a barrier. A place where kids like Lucas and Emma and Tommy can get the support they need without having to wait for a teacher who has time to help. Daniel stared at her, feeling his chest swell with pride and love and awe. That's an incredible idea. It's a big change, Sarah said quickly, nervously, and I know it'll take time and money to get started. We'd need to find a space, get funding, recruit volunteers. I've been saving my own money for it, but I know it's a lot to ask. Then let's do it, Daniel said. She blinked. What? Let's do it. Whatever you need, money, time, support, I'm in. He reached across the table and took her hand. You're going to change the world, Sarah, one kid at a time. And I want to be there to help. I want to see it happen. Really? Her voice was small, hopeful. Really? He squeezed her hand. I've spent 12 years taking you for granted, not really seeing what you do. I don't want to waste another minute. If this is your dream, then it's our dream, and we're going to make it happen together. Sarah's smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. And in that moment, Daniel understood what those bikers had seen in her, why they organized their morning ride around a simple wave. His wife was extraordinary, and he was the luckiest man alive. "It is special," Daniel said fiercely. "It's incredible. And those men, they wanted to honor you, to thank you. That's why they wave every morning. It's their way of showing respect." Sarah wiped at her eyes, laughing and crying at the same time. "I know. Bishop told me last month. Said they wanted to do something for my retirement, and I told them I didn't need anything. But they insisted. Said the ride was for them as much as for me. That it made them feel good to show appreciation." She shook her head. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. Didn't want you thinking I was mixed up with some dangerous motorcycle club." "Dangerous?" Daniel laughed, a sound caught somewhere between disbelief and wonder. "Sarah, those men are fathers and grandfathers. They're grateful. They love you, not in a weird way, but in the way people love someone who changed their family's life." He cupped her face in his hands. "I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I followed you instead of just asking. But I'm not sorry I found out, because I need to know. I need to understand how lucky I am to be married to someone who gives so much, who cares so much, who makes the world better just by showing up." Sarah smiled through her tears. "I'm not that special." "Yes," Daniel said, "you are." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other while the eggs grew cold on the stove. And outside, a motorcycle rumbled past. Someone heading to work, or to an early ride, or maybe just out enjoying the morning. Daniel heard it and smiled. The next morning, Daniel woke up at 6:30 with Sarah. She looked at him in surprise as he pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt. "What are you doing?" "Coming with you," he said, "if you don't mind." Her smile was like sunrise. "I don't mind." They walked together through the quiet streets, their breath misting in the cool morning air, and at 6:44 they reached the corner of Maple and Fifth. Sarah checked her watch, then looked at Daniel. "You ready?" "For what?" "To wave." He laughed. "Yeah, I'm ready." At 6:45 exactly, the rumble began. Distant at first, then growing, becoming thunder, and then the pack appeared. 10 bikes, 12, engines growling, chrome catching the light. They came down Maple Street like rolling poetry, and Sarah stepped to the curb and raised her coffee cup. Daniel raised his hand too, and every single rider waved back. Some nodded, some saluted. The old man with the gray beard, Bishop, slowed down and gave them both a thumbs up. And one younger rider, someone Daniel didn't recognize, actually pulled over for a moment and shouted, "Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell, my sister's doing great." Then they were gone, the pack disappearing toward the highway, and Daniel and Sarah stood there in the morning sun, hands raised, smiling at each other. "This," Sarah said softly, "is why I do it." "The waving?" "All of it." She gestured at the street, the town, the sky. "Teaching, helping, being there. Because moments like this, when someone remembers, when someone says thank you, they make it all worth it." Daniel took her hand. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why are you retiring? You're only 42. You could teach for another 20 years. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Because I want to do more. I've been thinking about starting a tutoring center, a place where kids who are struggling can come after school, get help with homework, have a safe space, maybe even do art and music programs." She looked at him, her eyes bright. "I know it's a big change, and I know it'll take time and money to get started, but I think it could make a real difference." Daniel felt his chest swell with pride and love and awe. "Then, let's do it," he said. "Whatever you need, I'm in." "Really?" "Really." He pulled her close. "You're going to change the world, Sarah. One kid at a time. And I want to be there to see it." They walked home hand in hand, and behind them the sun climbed higher, painting the streets in gold. And in the distance, so faint Daniel almost missed it, he heard the echo of motorcycles, a sound that had become, overnight, one of his favorites. 3 months later, Sarah opened the Mitchell Learning Center in a renovated building on the edge of downtown. It wasn't much, just 3 rooms, some donated furniture, a handful of volunteer tutors, but it was a start. Word spread quickly, and within 2 weeks they had 15 students signed up. Within a month, 30. By the end of the first semester, they had a waiting list. The grand opening was on a Saturday in early October, the air crisp with autumn and the trees blazing with color. Sarah had invited everyone, former students, their families, teachers from Jefferson Elementary, friends from church. The parking lot was packed, people spilling onto the sidewalk, and inside the center was warm and bright and full of laughter. Daniel stood near the entrance, greeting arrivals, feeling proud enough to burst. And then he heard it, that familiar rumble, growing louder. He stepped outside and saw them coming down the street, the pack, maybe 20 bikes now, more than he'd ever seen together. They pulled up in front of the center, engines rumbling, and one by one they shut down. Bishop swung off his Harley and walked over, his gray beard braided now, his eyes warm. "Heard there was an opening," he said. Daniel grinned. "You heard right." "Well," Bishop said, "we couldn't miss it. Your wife's been talking about this place for months. Figured we owed it to her to show up." The other riders dismounted, and Daniel recognized faces now. Diesel, the big man who'd first opened the clubhouse door, Hawk, who'd spoken about his niece Emma, Mason, whose nephew Sarah had helped after his parents died. And younger guys, too. Men in their 20s and 30s, some with kids in tow. One young man approached, his hand outstretched. "Lucas," he said, "Bishop's grandson. I don't know if you remember, but Mrs. Mitchell taught me in 2nd grade." Daniel shook his hand. "I remember. Bishop told me your story." Lucas smiled, and it transformed his face. "She saved my life, not exaggerating. I was heading down a bad path, and she pulled me back. I'm in college now, criminal justice. Want to help other kids the way she helped me." "She'll want to hear that," Daniel said, his throat tight. "I'll tell her," Lucas promised, and headed inside. One by one, the bikers filed into the center, leather cuts and tattoos mixing with families and former students and volunteers. Sarah stood in the middle of it all, her face glowing, hugging people and laughing and wiping away tears. When she saw Bishop, she crossed the room and threw her arms around him. "You came," she said. "Course we came," Bishop said gruffly. "Wouldn't miss this for the world." Daniel watched from the doorway as his wife moved through the crowd, touching lives just by being present, and he felt something settle deep in his chest. Gratitude, maybe, or just love so profound it had no name. That night, after everyone had left and the center was locked up, Daniel and Sarah sat on the front steps watching the stars come out. The street was quiet, the air cool, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. "Today was perfect," Sarah said, leaning against Daniel's shoulder. "It was," he agreed. "You did it. You're changing lives." "We're changing lives," she corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." Daniel kissed the top of her head. "I still can't believe I was jealous of those bikers." Sarah laughed. "You were jealous?" "Terrified," he admitted. I don't know what I thought, that you were living some secret life, that I didn't really know you." "And now?" "Now I know I married a superhero," he said simply, "and I'm the luckiest man alive." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars, and then Sarah said quietly, "Thank you." "For what?" "For following me that morning, for caring enough to find out the truth, for supporting this crazy dream of mine." She turned to look at him, her eyes shining. "For being my partner in all of this." Daniel took her hand. "Always," he said. "Whatever comes next, I'm with you." Even if it's more bikers waving at me? He laughed. Especially if it's more bikers waving at you. They went inside eventually, arms around each other. And upstairs, the lights went out one by one. The street settled into darkness, quiet and peaceful, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. And the next morning, at 6:45, Daniel and Sarah stood together at the corner of Maple and Fifth, coffee cups raised, waiting for the thunder. When it came, engines rumbling, chrome flashing in the sun, they waved as one. And every single rider waved back. Because some gestures transcend words. Some thank yous echo for years. And some women change the world not through grand declarations or public acclaim, but through quiet acts of kindness repeated day after day, until they become a legacy that outlives them. Sarah Mitchell was one of those women, and every morning as the pack rolled past, the brotherhood remembered, and waved, and rode on, carrying her light with them into whatever the day might bring. 1 year later, the Mitchell Learning Center had become a cornerstone of the Riverbend community. What had started as 3 rooms and a handful of volunteers had grown into a full operation with a permanent staff of 5, dozens of volunteer tutors, and programs that served over 100 kids every week. Daniel had quit his accounting firm, a decision that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure, and taken on the role of the center's director of operations. He handled the finances, the fundraising, the grant applications, all the administrative work that freed Sarah to do what she did best, connect with kids and change lives. They'd added an art program taught by a retired painter from the community college, a music program where kids could learn guitar and piano on donated instruments, a partnership with the local library that brought books and reading programs, and, most recently, a counseling service staffed by graduate students from the State University's psychology department who needed clinical hours. The center opened at 3 p.m. every weekday, right when school let out, and stayed open until 7. Kids arrived on bikes and skateboards, dropped off by parents, or walking from nearby schools. Some came for homework help. Others just needed a safe place to hang out, away from empty houses or difficult home situations. All of them found acceptance, support, and adults who genuinely cared whether they succeeded. On this particular Thursday in November, Daniel stood in the main room watching Sarah work with a small group of 3rd graders on long division. She had that special patience, that ability to explain concepts 10 different ways until one of them clicked. A little girl named Maria, whose family had immigrated from El Salvador 2 years ago, suddenly lit up with understanding, and Sarah's face mirrored that joy perfectly. "You've got it," Sarah said, her voice full of genuine excitement. "See, you're so smart, Maria. You just needed to see it a different way." Maria beamed, her confidence visibly growing, and returned to her worksheet with renewed determination. Daniel felt someone come up beside him. It was Diesel, the massive biker who'd become a regular volunteer at the center. Twice a week, he came in to help with the younger kids, his intimidating exterior melting away the moment he sat down with a picture book or helped a struggling student sound out words. "She's something else," Diesel said quietly, watching Sarah. "My niece Emma, she's at Berkeley now, full scholarship. And last week she called me to say she's thinking about becoming a teacher. Said she wants to pay forward what Mrs. Mitchell did for her." Daniel's throat tightened. "Sarah will love hearing that. I'll tell her before I leave." Diesel paused. "You know, when Bishop first said we should start waving at her every morning, some of the younger guys thought it was corny, thought we were going soft. But now," he gestured around the center, "at the kids working quietly, at the volunteers helping, at the walls covered with student artwork and thank you notes. Now they get it. This place exists because your wife spent 15 years caring about other people's kids, and we get to be part of it. That's not corny. That's sacred." Daniel blinked back tears. "Yeah," he managed. It really is. That evening, after the last student had been picked up and the volunteers had gone home, Daniel and Sarah did their usual closing routine, checking that all the lights were off, making sure the doors were locked, straightening up the common area so it would be ready for tomorrow. They moved together with practiced ease, partners in this work, just as they were partners in life. "Marcus got a B on his math test," Sarah said as she wiped down tables. "He was so proud, showed it to me 3 times. "That's great. He's been working hard. And Lily's parents are going to counseling. She told me today, very seriously, that her mom and dad are learning to communicate better." Sarah smiled. "She's 8 years old and already more emotionally intelligent than most adults." Daniel came over and wrapped his arms around her from behind, something that had become his favorite thing to do. "I'm so proud of you," he said, "of what you've built here." "What we've built," she corrected, leaning back against him. "I couldn't do any of this without you, Daniel. You gave me the freedom to dream bigger. You made this possible." They stood there for a moment in the quiet center, and Daniel thought about how much had changed in the past year. How discovering Sarah's morning ritual with the bikers had cracked open his understanding of who she was. How that discovery had led to conversations they should have had years ago. How those conversations had led to this, a partnership deeper and more meaningful than anything they'd had before. "Can I tell you something?" Sarah said softly. "Anything. When you followed me that morning last year, when you showed up at my kitchen angry and scared and confused, I was terrified. I thought you'd found out about the bikers and would think I was crazy or reckless or having some kind of midlife crisis." She turned in his arms to face him. "But instead, you listened. You tried to understand. And then you became my biggest supporter." Daniel cupped her face gently. "I should have been your biggest supporter all along. I should have been asking about your work, really listening when you talked about your students, understanding how much you were giving every single day. You're here now," she said. "That's what matters." They kissed, soft and sweet, and in that moment, Daniel felt more grateful than he'd ever been for anything in his life. Grateful for the fear that had driven him to follow Sarah that morning. Grateful for Bishop and the pack and their story about Lucas. Grateful for every twist in the road that had led them here. The next morning, Friday, Daniel and Sarah walked to Maple and Fifth together as they had every weekday for the past year. The morning was cold, frost glittering on parked cars, their breath visible in the pre-dawn darkness. But Daniel didn't mind. This had become his favorite part of the day, this quiet walk with Sarah, coffee in hand, preparing to wave at the brothers who'd become part of their extended family. They reached the corner at 6:44. Sarah checked her watch, smiled at Daniel, and they waited. At 6:45, right on schedule, the rumble began. But today was different. Today, there weren't 10 bikes, or 12, or even 20. Today, the pack stretched down Maple Street as far as Daniel could see, 40 bikes, maybe 50, engines growling in synchronized thunder. The Riverbend chapter was there, but so were riders from other chapters, their cuts showing different locations: Clear Creek, Pine Ridge, Bakersfield, even some from as far away as Sacramento. The pack rolled past slowly, every single rider raising a hand to wave. Some nodded, some saluted. Several had passengers on the back, wives, girlfriends, kids riding behind their fathers, and they waved too. The sound was deafening, glorious, a rolling celebration of chrome and power and brotherhood. Bishop led the formation, and when he reached the corner, he stopped his bike entirely. The rest of the pack followed suit, engines idling but no longer moving. Bishop pulled off his helmet and climbed off his Road King, and suddenly Daniel and Sarah were surrounded by bikers dismounting, forming a circle around them. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, looking around in confusion. Bishop approached, and in his hands he held a leather vest, a cut, black with patches sewn on. He handed it to Sarah with ceremonial care. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying over the idling engines. "The Brotherhood has voted unanimously. We'd like to make you an honorary member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club Riverbend chapter." Sarah's hand shook as she took the vest. On the back was a custom patch, not the death head, but something created specifically for her. It showed an open book with wings, and below it, the words, "Teacher, Protector, Family." I don't know what to say," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Say you'll accept it," Bishop said gently. "Say you'll let us honor you the way you've honored our families. You may not ride a bike, but you're one of us. You've earned that patch 100 times over." Sarah looked at Daniel, her eyes asking a question. He nodded, smiling through his own tears. "I accept," Sarah said. "I'm honored, so honored." The bikers erupted in applause and cheers, and several of them came forward to hug Sarah, to shake Daniel's hand, to express gratitude that had been building for years. Lucas was there, home from college for the weekend. Emma had come up from Berkeley, bringing 3 of her friends who wanted to meet the teacher who'd changed her life. Even Marcus, the 8-year-old who'd gotten a B on his math test, was there, riding on the back of his Uncle Hawk's bike, grinning ear to ear. "Put it on," someone called out, and the crowd took up the chant. "Put it on! Put it on!" Sarah laughed and slipped the vest over her jacket. It fit perfectly, and when she turned around so everyone could see the patch on the back, the cheers grew even louder. Bishop raised his hands for quiet, and the crowd settled. "Brothers and sisters," he said, his voice carrying, "Mrs. Mitchell has agreed to be the guest of honor at our annual Brotherhood ride next month. We'll be riding through Riverbend, past the Learning Center, showing the community what it looks like when family supports family. All in favor?" A chorus of ayes rang out, unanimous and enthusiastic. Then it's settled. Bishop turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Mitchell, you've changed our lives. You've given our families hope when we didn't have any. You've shown us what true dedication looks like. This patch, it's not just a thank you. It's a promise. From now until the day we hang up our keys, you're family. And family looks out for each other." Sarah was crying openly now, and so was Daniel, and so were half the riders around them. But these were good tears, healing tears, the kind that came from being truly seen and valued and loved. The pack remounted eventually, engines roaring to life once more. As they pulled away, every rider waved one final time to Sarah in her new vest, and she waved back, standing tall and proud with her honorary colors on her back. When the last bike disappeared and the sound faded, Daniel and Sarah stood alone on the corner in the growing light of dawn. The frost was melting now, the sun climbing higher, and a new day was beginning. "I can't believe that just happened," Sarah said, looking down at her vest, running her fingers over the custom patch. "Believe it," Daniel said. "You earned it. Every single stitch." They walked home slowly, savoring the moment, and when they reached their house, Sarah hung the vest carefully in the front closet where she could see it every day. It hung there beside Daniel's jacket and Sarah's teaching bag, a symbol of connection and community and love that transcended conventional boundaries. And every morning after that, when Sarah wore her vest on the walk to Maple and Fifth, the bikers' waves seemed even more enthusiastic, more personal, as if they were greeting not just a teacher they respected, but a true member of their brotherhood. The road stretched on, full of sunrises and waves and moments of grace. And Daniel understood now that he would spend the rest of his life grateful. Grateful for jealousy that led to discovery. Grateful for fear that led to understanding. Grateful for a wife who kept surprising him with the depth of her kindness and the breadth of her impact. Some stories end with grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but this story ended the way the best stories do, with a morning wave, a shared coffee, and the simple joy of walking beside someone who made every day better just by being in it. The bikers would ride again tomorrow. The kids would come to the center. Sarah would change more lives. And Daniel would be there, finally paying attention, finally understanding that he'd married not just a good person, but an extraordinary one. And that was more than enough.
That was everything.